Hey everyone, you guys, I am the worst because I left you at such an amazing spot and I didn't check in for a week. So sorry. We are going to read chapter 12 now, which is called A Midnight Visit. Somewhere, sounding so far off as if to come from another world, a clock told the hour of 12. Whether midnight, midday, or midnight, it must have been impossible to tell. The remembrance room had no outside windows and only allowed the barest whisper of flickering gaslight through a small square window in the door. Emily knew it to be midnight only because it had been afternoon when she was locked up. Every bone in her body had begun to ache as she tossed restlessly on the hard wooden bench that served as a bed. She couldn't help shivering under the miserably thin coverlet provided by the management, as Kipper would have said. And oh, how she would have loved to hear his voice saying it at that moment. All she had for company were her own grim thoughts, drumming endlessly through her tired head, making sleep impossible. Clarabelle drowned. Everything ended. 21 whole days and nights in the remembrance room. Clarabelle drowned. Clarabelle drowned. Drowned. How many times this parade of horrors had circled Emily's brain, she had no idea. But the clock was not much more than stopped tolling when, through the suffocating darkness, she heard someone singing softly. The voice was so close, it might have almost been in the same room. I've come to see you, Emily, Emily, Emily. It's me come back from the fiddle-dee-dee, my fair lady. Emily scrambled from the bench and stumbled to the door. Kipper! A brass lantern appeared in the window, lighting up Kipper's smiling face. None other. But you're not supposed to be here, Emily cried. You're supposed to be banished from Sugar Hill Hall. So I've been told, said Kipper cheerfully. Your aunt told me, and then Tilly told me, and in case my ears weren't polished up good enough to hear all them mornings, the snake lady herself told me. First, of course, she had to tell me about where you was and why and for how long. Then she said sweetly, don't ever set foot in Sugar Hill Hall. Vile fishmonger's boy. Them's her exact words. So why are you here? Asked Emily. Well, it so happens I ain't setting foot in Sugar Hill Hall. I'm setting 2 feet, and I ain't had any warnings about that. Further, though the snake lady's sly as a fox and mean as a viper, sometimes she ain't any smarter than a woolly caterpillar. She forgot all about asking me for this. Grinning, Kipper held up a brass key for Emily to see. Despite all that had happened to her, Emily could not help giggling. She giggled and giggled helplessly, but gradually the giggles became gasps for air, and at length became sobs. Oh, Kipper, I've been so stupid. I should have listened to you about the fish syrup and Clarabelle. Now all the old people are worse than ever, and Clarabelle has been drowned. Tears poured down Emily's cheek. I ain't able to do anything about Clarabelle, Kipper said, and I'm sad and sorry for losing that kitten. But I ain't blaming you for it, nor his pa for trying to help the old ones. And it's true that they're worse off. It's not true they were worse off. They've had a touch of sunshine in their poor old lives, and who's to say they ain't a lot better for it? Here now, take this and dry your eyes, and no more crying about tuna, which took off with the tide, as pa always says. Kipper handed Emily a ragged bit of cloth through the window to serve as a handkerchief. It smelled terribly of fish, but to Emily, nothing could have smelled better in the whole world at that moment. She stopped up her eyes and nose and smiled tremendously at Kipper. That's more like it, said Kipper. Now, what we got to do is figure out how everything got told to the snake lady, meaning who done the deed. Now, as how we can not do much about it, but we can best know who not to tell what to, and who to be extra careful around. Could it have been one of the old ones? Never, said Emily. Kipper shrugged. One of them could have spilled a bean accidental-like. Then the whole rest came tumbling out. Emily thought this over. I don't think so. Then she said triumphantly, not one of the old people knew about my gold coins or where they are hidden, so it couldn't have been any of them. Whew, Kipper wiped his brow. For the same reason, couldn't have been me either. Good thing I never allowed you to tell me about your hiding space. You see how it would have been? Kipper, Emily said indignantly, I never suspected you, not for a moment, and I never even remembered not telling you about the hiding place. So there. Well, good thing all the same, Kipper grinned. Come to think about it, your aunt knew, but she didn't know anything else, said Emily. Besides, you know it couldn't have been Aunt Twice. Guess I do. Well, now, how about Mrs. Plumley? She doesn't know anything at all, replied Emily. Kipper scratched his head. All that's left then is them mysterious old Sugar Hill ears and eyes and everything. Not quite all, said Emily. There's still Tilly. Oh, I never even considered old Till, said Kipper. I mean, she ain't all that perfect, but she ain't black-hearted enough to do something like this. Besides, she didn't have any knowledge about anything more than Miss Plumley. She could have, insisted Emily. She was snooping about the door the night Aunt Twice and I hid the gold coins, and she could have caught the old people. You know, once there was no one better than Tilly for figuring out news. True, admitted Kipper, but... He shook his head doubtfully. And there's one more thing, said Emily. Don't you remember those words you sang to me about Tilly telling for Peppermints? Yes, well, Emily interrupted firmly. When I passed Tilly on the way to being brought down here, I smelled peppermint. And it came from her, Kipper. Dingus, exclaimed Kipper solemnly. So 'twas Tilly after all. I would never have believed it. As dismayed by this discovery as Emily was angered by it, Kipper left soon afterwards, although only because it was too dangerous to stay any longer, and he left with the firm promise of returning the next night with a bottle of fish syrup, which, as Pa always said, strengthens the spirit as well as the appetite. She had no sooner dropped into a fitful sleep, however, that she heard her name being called out. Somehow it seemed to be woven into a terrible dream she was having. Emily, Emily, the voice said urgently. She woke up all the way at last, but it took her moments to recover from the dread of remembering where she was. The sound of her name being called, however, did not disappear with her dream. It continued to tremble in the darkness, whispered over and over, Emily, Emily. Cautiously, she looked towards the window in the door, and there in the flickering light of a candle, she saw Tilly's pale face and flat blue eyes staring at her. Go away, Tilly, said Emily. You're a wicked girl. I ain't no such thing, declared Tilly, her candle wavering dangerously, and I couldn't sleep 2 winks for thinking on how you might believe I told when I ain't the one at all, Tilly sniffled miserably. Yes, you are, and there's no use lying about it, because when I passed you in the parlor, I smelled peppermints, Tilly, and I know where it came from. At that, Tilly's candle trembled even more violently. Don't say nothing about that to Miss Meaching. Promises on how you won't say nothing, Emily. Why should I promise, said Emily, who wouldn't have told Miss Meaching anything in her life. Because I never earned them peppermints for telling. I stole them, Emily. You might have noted how scared I looked in the parlor. Well, that was 'cause I thought on how the whole shebang was about me. Emily studied this a moment. Well, please don't tell, Tilly pleaded. Anyway, it proves I ain't so wicked as you think. How? Said Emily. Without a word, Tilly thrust something at Emily through the tiny window in the door. The something was Clarabelle, Emily cried. Clarabelle, 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 oh, Tilly, you didn't drown her after all. Of course not, said Tilly indignantly. I love kittens, cats too. I would never drown no kitten, though it's worth my life hiding this one. In case you had any doubts further about my feelings, I might as well tell you. I knowed about her all along. You didn't, explained Emily, burying her face rapturously into the kitten's soft fur. Did too, said Tilly. I didn't know about them gold coins, but I knew about the fish syrup, seeing it in your bucket one day, and about the old people was doing it too, and I never told. I never did, Emily. I believe you now, Tilly, Emily cried. I really do. So can us orphans go on being friends? Asked Tilly. Yes, we can, declared Emily, with her whole heart. We really can. She could hardly wait to tell this good news to Kipper. She was so taken up with Clarabelle, however, and the startling new revelation about Tilly. It wasn't until the two of them had left, leaving her once again in the crushing darkness, that the grim question leaped back into her mind. If not Tilly, then who? we are stopping there for right now, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.